Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cherry the Geek TV. I'm Joe Vanourney. Today, we are joined by Rolling Stone journalist Paul Solotaroff, who is currently behind a major new investigative true crime podcast in association with Lava for Good and Rolling Stone Films. It's called Bone Valley Season 5, The Devil's Quarry. It is an official selection at the Tribeca Festival, and it will be available starting June 10th with new episodes dropping weekly wherever you get your podcasts. Paul, hello. Welcome to Cherry the Geek. So awesome to talk to you.
I am delighted and honored to be here.
So set up the podcast for people. What's the premise of The Devil's Quarry?
So, 32 years ago, beautiful 12-year-old girl, blonde, very vulnerable, unhappy at home, constantly wandering the streets of small town Carmel, New York, 50 miles from New York City, north, is last seen getting into a red and black sports car with Connecticut license plates on the afternoon of October 30th, 1994. She is never seen alive again in Carmel. Her body is discovered 13 months later in the woods off of Carmel, New York, by a pair of hunters setting up a tree stand for the first day of hunting season. First, they accidentally kick over her skull, and then before they know it, the woods are swarming with Putnam Sheriff's detectives who are now looking for the rest of her remains. You know you're in bad cop land immediately because the cops not only don't tell these two guys to beat it, but they allow them to walk the crime scene and ultimately discover the girl's skeletonized remains. It's the hunters who find her body. She's under light ground cover. She's been there for 13 months. Immediately, any trained cop would have realized this is the work of a serial predator. Immediately. Why? Because her hands and throat and legs were bound in the most sophisticated hog tie that would have been impossible for anyone not very practiced at shibui, the art of Japanese rope tying, would have been unable to do. Additionally, fetish objects were found on her. Her underwear was stuffed in her mouth. Her bra was tied around her eyes. So she was blindfolded and gagged with her own underwear, an obvious tell that the perp had practiced and had fetishized this very crime in its staging. Again, a veteran detective would have instantly called in to the state police of New York or gone over their heads, called the behavioral analysis unit at Quantico, the FBI's BAU, and said, look, we have what is clearly the criminal signature of someone who has either done this before or has been practicing but not risen to the level of homicide. We're in grave fear that he's going to do it again here. And sure enough, six months later, actually, by the time they discovered Josette's body, so 6 months earlier, a second beautiful young woman, also a teen, went missing in Carmel, New York. Now, this is a part of the country where there is no violent crime, where there are no trained forensic units, where there are, in fact, as we wind up discovering all these years later, the two cops appointed to lead the investigation had never worked violent crimes before, had never worked a murder before, and were hopelessly unequipped to solve the crime. Nonetheless, everybody in town had a pretty good idea who the doer was. The town pedophile, the town creep, this guy who had a long and prolific history of assaults and sexual violence, and who was well known to the kids of Putnam County as someone to be very leery of. And instead, these two dumb fuck cops identify and build a fake case around two hapless stoner teenagers who they disliked because they were the town drug dealers. Now, what were they dealing? They weren't dealing crack. They weren't dealing cocaine. They were dealing weed. They were dealing ecstasy. And they were so inept as drug dealers that they were consuming much more than they sold. They were losing much more than they made. And these two mopes were hauled in, were sweated mercilessly, not read their rights, not allowed to use the John, not allowed to call home, and one of them broke. One of them gave a false confession, thanks in part to a crooked polygraph expert who was also a cop, who gave the kid a polygraph test after loading him up with gallons of coffee. And so the kid signs a 9-page confession that the cops had written it beforehand. So, long story short, two kids go away, Andy Krivak and his best friend, Anthony DePippo, go away in 1997 for the rest of their lives for the rape murder of a girl one of them had met once for 20 seconds. Meanwhile, the predator moves east by 15 miles to Fairfield County, Connecticut, where he starts up all over again. Two new victims, but in Connecticut, they take the rape of a child seriously. And they catch him, they try him, they convict him, and they sentence him to 30 years, Joe. Here's the problem. When I published The Devil You Know 5 years ago, his release from prison was mostly theoretical. Well, 15 months ago, I got a call from one of the surviving victims who said, screaming, sobbing, he's getting out early. They're letting him out of prison 4 years early. And I can tell you I wanted nothing more to do with the story after almost having a nervous breakdown reporting it in 2021. But at that point, I had no choice. I had to round up this extraordinary group of reporters, producers, a dream team of investigators. And we went and we traveled to 4 states. We interviewed dozens of new witnesses, found new survivors of this monster. And all of that is in these 8 searing episodes of The Devil's Quarry. Why did we do this? Why did I go back to material that was so painful, that was so haunting the first time? One, because nobody ever lifted a finger to help these broken girls who are now middle-aged women, who are carrying all of this trauma forward, who are carrying all of the wreckage of this man, and who to this day get threatening letters from this monster in prison, who are in absolute terror for their lives. So we had to go public with what we know, and to go public in a way that even a Rolling Stone story does not have the power to convey. And that is that we need everyone's voice. We need all of our listenership. We need all of your listenership. We need your passion, your public, to join ours in holding the broken criminal justice system in Putnam County to account, in holding the New York Attorney General, Letitia James, to account. Turns out, all these years later, even if he's never convicted of these 2 murders, he can be kept in prison for the rest of his life under something called civil commitment. The Attorney General can go to a judge and say, this man not only has never expressed remorse or committed one moment to rehabilitation, he continues to disavow his crimes and continues to threaten his surviving victims. She can go to a judge and say, we demand you give us the power to imprison him indefinitely in a locked psychiatric facility. So that is our mission statement. But mission statement part B is these two families have murdered girls and no closure. In fact, until we began reinvestigating Josette Wright's murder, the Putnam Sheriff's Department would not reopen her case file. They have in the last month. Just weeks before we go live, they have decided, oh, this is worthy of our attention. And so they are now, it would appear, actively engaged in getting to the bottom of two historic cases, Josette Wright and her neighbor, Robin Murphy, both of whom have not, both of whom have suffered the ultimate victimhood and have never been given justice. So that's the series in a nutshell.
We learn through your investigation in the podcast that the people meant to protect Josette looked the other way. Can you speak to the institutional and community failures that allowed her disappearance to be ignored initially?
Brilliant question. So, as someone who's been reporting on big city cops, corruption, malfeasance for the better part of 30 years, I'd always wanted it and was always curious about what it looks like in small town America. What happens when there's no social justice, no nonprofit? It's just the sheriff's word that a crime has been solved. And in this case, there were two horrific wrongful convictions. So Anthony DePippo did 20 years. Andy, his best friend, did 25. My story helped free the second of them. Anthony got $17 million in restitution. Andy got 25 million. But what we set out to discover was why the cops of Putnam County, not just the sheriff's detectives and deputies, why the entire law enforcement apparatus in Putnam County gave this man a hunting license to prowl for young girls for 15 years, and then allowed him to simply move 15 miles east and set up and do it again. So we have very strong evidence pointing to one conclusion as to why he was given a pass in case after case after case. And when I say pass, Joe, I mean they never interviewed him, they never sweated him, they never even doorstepped him to inquire about an alibi for the night Josette Wright went missing on October 3rd, 1994. The obvious prime suspect never even gets doorstepped. When those cops found Josette's body and informed her mother that they had, after 13 months, found the remains of her murdered child, the first thing she said was, "Oh my God, Howard Gombert killed my daughter." Well, that's the predator in question. How loudly do you have to announce to the cops investigating the case that the identity of your prime suspect is known to one and all? And what we learned because when these kids, these now middle-aged men, were released from prison, they immediately sued for wrongful conviction. And what the pretrial deposition showed us was that the cops not only never interviewed Gombert, but they lied and lied and lied and said that they had cleared him. But nobody could say who had done the clearing, who had actually obtained an alibi for this guy who was so good for this crime. And so we think we know why they gave him a pass. We think there's complicity, but we also think that this predator has major leverage. He knows something about the Putnam Sheriff's Department. And that something is his weapon to keep himself out of the net. Well, there's a new sheriff, there are new cops, so that hunting pass has been revoked. And again, we are bound and determined not only to get justice for those two families of murdered girls, we are also bound and determined to get justice and restitution for the ones who lived, for the girls who survived his attacks. And not only did they never get acknowledgement from those cops, not only did those cops never investigate Gilbert, no one from victim services ever called these children and said, "What do you need? How can we make you whole? Can we offer you counseling? Can we offer you, you know, some kind of restitution for the horrific abuses you've suffered?" It never happened. Instead, the Putnam County law enforcement spat in the faces of these girls and the women who had also been violated.
Through your experience, how common is stuff like this? How common is incompetence and corruption in police forces? How common is it that innocent people are put in prison? We know about the Innocence Project and how there's been not everybody that's in prison is innocent, but there's more than there should be, right? And we're learning hundreds of people getting released that through DNA evidence later proven like these guys didn't do the crime, somebody else did it. From your experience, is that a common thing, and is there a solution?
So we seem to be working our way towards the light about 10, 12 years ago in this country. We had a Justice Department that was really interested in not only investigating crooked cops, but exposing patterns and practices of corrupt systems. That all went out the window in 2016 for reasons I don't even have to divulge here. And we're now back into the dark ages where cops can do, can say, can destroy evidence. What happened in this case, Joe, was cops didn't simply omit this guy from the case file. They destroyed lots of evidence that incriminated him. And so when you ask if this is common, here's what we know about sheriffs in America. First of all, they are answerable to no one. If you're the sheriff in small town America, and small town America is 74% of America, you are judge, jury, hangman in your county. And we know because there are all these cases surfacing now of wrongful convictions, wrongful shootings, wrongful murders of suspects, passersby, by rural sheriff's officers. And not only do those people never get tried and convicted, they never even have to account for their crimes by forfeiting their pension, by forfeiting their rank. So where there's no disincentive to be a bad cop, where there's every incentive to break the law, to ignore the law, and there's nobody watching over your shoulder, what's to prevent rampant misconduct, rampant abuses of the Constitution, especially the Fourth Amendment? What's to prevent all these wrongful convictions from just piling on top of each other? And in this case, we were so blessed because of these lawsuits against the cops. They had to actually testify. They had to explain themselves. And they caught themselves in so many lies, in so many blatant acts of perjury that we now understand much more than we did when Anthony was released 10 years ago, having proved his actual innocence. When Andy was released 3 years ago, having proved his actual innocence. What we understand is that there was this concerted, I don't want to call it conspiracy, let's call it collusion, to send the wrong people to jail and to protect the prime suspect in these cases at the expense of the children in Putnam County, and then in Fairfield County, Connecticut, who were next up on this predator's hit list. So yes, it happens much more often than you read about. We know that there are great cops. I've written stories about great cops. I build statues to great cops, but I put bad cops in prison. I get bad cops kicked off the force. I get corrupt prosecutors disbarred. I get in the bag judges to step down from the bench by shaming them in the court of public opinion. Again, we are so grateful to and privileged to have passionate, um, popular friends in the community like your show that will act as a force multiplier to apply pressure to the Putnam County Sheriff's Department, to the Putnam County DA's office to get to the truth for these two families who've lost beautiful babies and to get restorative justice for the victims of Howard Gomber who were never, ever taken care of the first time.
Let's talk about Anthony DePippo. He's one of the two teenagers who was falsely sent to prison. He's featured heavily in the podcast. You do a lot of interviews with you do a lot of interviews with him, and he's a wonderful storyteller. He's got a great he tells the story very well. He's got a great personality for an audio podcast. He's fascinating to me because he's not a perfect guy. Certainly, he's done a lot of dumb things, especially when he's a kid. He's not he's not a saint, but he's fascinating because once he goes to prison and he's got time on his hands, he decides he's gonna become a cell block lawyer, right? He starts reading law books. He educates himself on the law. He starts at page 1. He goes, I just started at page 1 and I just started reading everything I could find about the law. And then at some point while he's there, he's like, you know what? I've figured out I know I didn't do the crime. That means whoever did the crime is still out there, and I'm gonna figure out who it was sitting here in this jail cell. So what does that tell you about him? That the most morally urgent crusade for truth is coming from inside a jail cell rather than from the police precinct. How eager
Beautiful.
was he to tell your story, and what was your take on him getting to
What a
do an
great,
interview?
what a great question. So Anthony goes to prison at the age of 18. He goes up as an adult wearing the worst jacket you can wear, convicted pedophile killer. And he's a ninth grade dropout. He failed ninth grade twice. He spends about 6 months getting huge in the prison, yard, and then he discovers the prison library where he not only teaches himself to read and write, he teaches himself the law so well that the greatest trial lawyer in America, Mark Agnifilo, who is currently in court as we speak, representing Luigi Mangione, who got Diddy off of 36 counts for racketeering and sex trafficking, who got Harvey Weinstein off of a rape count in New York State. That Mark Agnifilo met Anthony in his visiting county jail cell and walked away after 5 hours saying, I just met the best lawyer in America. I'm going to let Anthony try this case, but I'm going to be the one getting up and addressing the jury. And so Anthony, who knew nothing about the Constitution, nothing about the law, becomes this savant. And you put your finger on Anthony as a character. He is such a D's, them, and those guys. He sounds like he just took 6 stolen TVs off the back of a truck on Route 17 in upstate New York. But he is this extraordinary sleuth. And in a just world, Anthony would be the celebrity private investigator. He has too much money to do that now. He got his 17 million and he moved to Montana. But he is this marvelous and sympathetic character who everyone listening to the show will fall in love with and really want to build a statue to. This guy whose idol was Hulk Hogan, who got to befriend the Hulkster before Hulk died. This guy dug himself out of his own grave and became a true American hero. And it was such a privilege. It was such an honor to be a part of clearing his name and clearing Andy's name. And again, my plea, my message to your listenership is, don't just listen with your ears, listen with your mouth. Make your outrage known. It will take a village to solve these two crimes. It will take a village to keep this predator in prison for the rest of his life, and to finally bring the light of justice to a very dark, nebulous community 50 miles north of the Bronx.
As a journalist who has spent years of his life with this story, you mentioned earlier that after the print article that you did, you had you had a breakdown, right? Uh, and how does this affect you when you're spending all this time with victims and in this world of that you start seeing, what the crimes were, and you're seeing evil up close and depravity. How does that affect you? Like, how does that affect you? Are you able to compartmentalize it? Talk to me about how this has affected you spending years.
Another fabulous question. Yes, there is this learned ability to, kind of segregate the horror and the unfairness of this terrible thing that's been done, so that you don't wind up divorced 4 times. Half the great FBI undercovers I know are married 5 times, and I say to them, is there anything in common with these 5 women? And they all look at me like, yeah, they're all crazy as hell. Well, duh, they married your nutty ass. In order not to be that guy, I am able to, as I say, kind of partition this stuff. But what I can't partition is the feeling. I cannot partition the outrage. And what really fucked with me, Joe, was the cries of those girls, was the suffering. And when you've been raped at 7, when you've been sodomized at 8, when you've been bound and gagged at 9, you can get all the therapy in the world, and these girls got no therapy, but it will always be that day in the back of your mind. Your unconscious brain will always live in terror, will live in darkness. And that's what haunted me. That's why I couldn't go near this story until I got a call from one of these women saying, help, you're the only person I can call. He's getting out. Please do something.
How was your experience working in this new audio format to tell the story? How did having 8 episodes, sound design, music, interview clips, sound bites from court cases, telling the story? Talk to me about your experience.
I love it to death, and I would do it for free. Unfortunately, I know.
You can answer that.
Yeah. It's marvelous. It's also acutely embarrassing, because the first time you listen to yourself on playback, you want to strangle yourself. You sound like William Hwang on American Idol. It's just nails on a chalkboard until you learn how to actually narrate in a way that sounds like the way you sound. And that was very, not humbling, it was humiliating. But at a certain point, unless you're completely hopeless, you do get the hang of it. And so I'm being given the cow hook here.
Okay. Well, we thank you for your time. It's a wonderful podcast. It's called The Devil's Quarry. You can find it starting June 10th with episodes dropping weekly, wherever you get your podcasts. Paul, thank you so much for chatting with us today on Cherry the Geek TV.
Joe, you're superb.
Thank
you so much.
Appreciate you.
I'm on the back of a motorcycle, so I kind of had his jacket, and I felt the knife, and I just got this feeling he's gonna kill me.
That was your first murder case?
Yes, sir.
Fair to say this was the biggest case of your career?
Yes, sir. Rape and murder of a 12-year-old
This
child.
is as bad as it gets.
I would think so.
They were all troubled. Every single one of them.
They took me to go kill a girl. Wasn't expecting that.
And you never offered her any favors, correct?
No.
People, wake up! I'm the one that saw the murder take place by Tribeca and DePippo.
Anthony DePippo showed no signs of remorse, appearing unfazed after being sentenced to the maximum.
I said, I'm not guilty, I'll take it to the grave.
He had prior knowledge of all his victims. They were also found with clothing stuffed down their throat. Most were threatened with death, and 2 of them were also taken into the woods, just like in this case. Put that together.
In 2021, I'd have laughed in your face if you'd asked me about the devil. But soon, very soon, you'll know what I know, that the devil is real and walks among us.
And you want to know what goes through my head is how many of them could have been saved if they would have just listened to me.